Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When Zach Griffin planted a simple no trespassing sign on his land, he didn't expect to spark a war. But when an HOA queenpin, fake surveys, midnight intrusions, and legal chaos erupt, one man must defend his forest with facts, drones, and sheer grit. This is no neighborly dispute, it's war. There's something oddly satisfying about planting a sign. That thunk when the stake finally drives into packed earth. That moment when the bold black letters stand tall against the grain of the forest behind them, delivering a simple message to the world. This is mine. I didn't think much of it when I installed the sign that morning. Just a quiet Saturday, sky hanging heavy with early spring clouds, and me, Zach Griffin, 42 forest architect, occasional hermit, tacking a clearly worded, laminated warning onto a cedar post near the southern footpath of my land. The message was direct, even polite. Private property, no trespassing without permission. GPS zone 41 Pentasson Odendonizurn 112 Non-9934 Desires Nadwais. No threats, no drama, just coordinates and a reminder. But as I'd soon learn, simple things tend to provoke the most noise, especially when Karen Delaney gets involved. The ground was still a little damp from last week's rain, but I'd come prepared. I had a hammer, stainless screws, and the same calm confidence that came from knowing every inch of my 17-acre property like the back of my hand. My boundary lines weren't just sentimental, they were cadastral gospel. Certified by county registry, GPS verified, and backed by a court-issued restraining order from last year's disaster with the Valley Pines Reserve HOA. A restraining order, mind you, that explicitly barred Karen and her board from coming within 50 feet of my land. You'd think that would be enough, but you've never met Karen. By evening, the sign stood clean and sharp at the edge of a worn trail, maybe 20 feet from the HOA's border. That trail used to be an old mule line, now half overgrown and barely noticeable unless you were deliberately looking. Last year, Karen had mistakenly tried to turn it into a pedestrian path for HOA residents without asking. That mess ended with lawyers, affidavits, drone footage, and a very expensive loss for Valley Pines. Since then, I figured things had cooled. I figured wrong. The next morning, I was pulling tarps off my workbench near the west shed when I heard tires on gravel. Not the slow roll of a delivery truck or the bounce of someone lost. This was deliberate. A deep-chested V8 crawling up the road like it had something to prove. I rounded the corner of the barn and froze. Sheriff's vehicle. Blacked-out Tahoe. 2 deputies in the front, and in the back seat, leaning forward like a queen arriving at Versailles, was none other than Karen Delaney herself. Beige cashmere cardigan, giant sunglasses, and that smug little grin that made my knuckles tighten involuntarily. The driver stepped out first, adjusting his belt. Late 40s, stocky, wore his authority like a badge he'd polish with toothpaste. "Mr. Griffin," he called. "Yeah, morning," I said slowly, already on guard. "We received a 911 call yesterday afternoon. Caller reported that a male subject, fitting your description, unlawfully posted a no trespassing sign on community land belonging to the Valley Pines HOA. She also reported that the subject acted aggressively and may have threatened residents." The words took a second to settle. I blinked, then let out a short, humorless laugh. "Aggressively posted a sign? You serious?" The other deputy had stepped out by now, and Karen rolled her window halfway down, waving her phone like a proud snitch. I didn't respond to her. Instead, I reached into the side pocket of my field jacket and pulled out the folder I now carried for moments exactly like this. Inside, laminated copies of the restraining order, the county's 2021 cadastral map, and a high-resolution satellite image with my GPS coordinates overlaid. I handed it to the first deputy. "Signs at these coordinates," I said. Clearly within my boundary, less than 20 feet from the midpoint marker. I double-checked it myself. "You'll see the survey markers still intact." He flipped through the document slowly. The other deputy wandered toward the road, glancing over the tree line like he might spot a disputed tree if he stared hard enough. Karen's voice chimed in from the vehicle. "He's lying. That whole area has always been community access. Look at how close it is to the HOA trail. It's right on the line." The first deputy frowned, handing back the folder. "You got a problem with me photographing the sign, Mr. Griffin?" "Not unless you plan to trespass to do it," I said evenly. "But I'll escort you down. You'll see the county stake just 2 feet east of the post." He didn't argue. Instead, he nodded to the second deputy, and the two of them followed me through the trees. Karen didn't get out of the car. I led them 50 yards down the path until the sign came into view. It stood exactly where I left it. Untouched, clean, no dramatic scene, just a cedar post and some printed plastic mounted with stainless steel screws. 2 feet east of the post sat the rebar stake with a bright pink flag. County boundary, do not remove. The lead deputy scratched his head. You sure this GPS is accurate? I gave him a look. I'm a forest architect, not a TikTok hiker. My GPS is military grade. I mapped this line after last year's trial. You want the raw drone data? I'll email it. He didn't answer. Instead, he snapped photos of the post, the stake, the general area, more than seemed necessary, really. Then he took a wide shot that included my house in the background. What's that for? I asked, tension creeping in. Standard documentation, he replied, though he didn't sound convinced. By the time we returned to the Tahoe, Karen was scrolling through her phone like she was already writing her next email to the county commissioner. I thanked the deputies through gritted teeth, and they left without further incident. But the way they lingered, the way they took their time, it didn't sit right. Something told me this wasn't over, and I was absolutely right. A week after the Tahoe incident, just when I thought the dust had settled, I received a letter from the Box Elder County Sheriff's Office. It arrived by certified mail, thick and heavy, like bad news wrapped in bureaucracy. The envelope even smelled official, paper, toner, and that faint whiff of someone trying very hard to make your life difficult. I cracked it open at the kitchen counter with a knife and a sigh, already bracing myself. And sure enough, there it was, dressed up in deputy-grade legalese. A notice of temporary property restriction citing an ongoing investigation into unlawful signage and improper boundary marking in proximity to Valley Pines Reserve HOA. I had to read it twice. The letter informed me that due to a formal complaint and attached survey documents, my southern property boundary was now under review by the county assessor's office. Until the investigation was complete, I was barred from making any modifications. No fence maintenance, no tree removal, no additional signage, within a 20-foot buffer of the contested edge. The phrase they used was moratorium on activity, which sounds a hell of a lot more civilized than we're freezing your land based on someone else's fantasy. Attached to the complaint was a document labeled Independent Geodetic Assessment, signed by someone claiming to be a licensed boundary surveyor. At the bottom was a firm name I'd never heard of, and the watermark read, updated April 1983. I nearly choked on my coffee. 1983. That map was older than my beard, and they were using it to question a boundary that had been updated and digitally validated as recently as 2 years ago. But what really made my jaw tighten wasn't the date. It was the signature. I cross-referenced it immediately, flipping open my laptop and diving into the Utah Professional Licensing System. The name didn't come up. Not under surveyors, not under engineers. Hell, not even under dog groomers. But what did show up was a disciplinary record. License revoked in 2018. Permanent ban from certifying legal land surveys due to fraudulent boundary submissions and falsified field logs. In other words, a ghost. I forwarded everything to my attorney, Claire Bateman, with a 2-word subject line. They're back. Claire responded within 20 minutes, and she wasn't gentle. This is a coordinated hit, she wrote. Karen's testing the system. Again. The key difference, this time she's using false documentation and someone with a revoked license. That's criminal, but we'll need proof of coordination. Start logging everything. Time, date, contact points, and lock down your perimeter. I was already ahead of her. That afternoon, I installed a full grid of wireless trail cams around the disputed southern corridor, 4 total motion-triggered, streaming directly to a private cloud. I also deployed my drone, a little monster with GPS mapping and night vision, and set it to patrol mode. Every 6 hours, it would loop the boundary line, capturing any changes to foliage, markers, or unauthorized activity. The next day, I drove to the county office myself. The clerk behind the glass partition gave me a tired look when I asked to view my parcel file, but her tone changed the moment I mentioned the complaint. She fetched a thick manila folder labeled Griffin Zach, Valley Pines Adjacency. Inside were my filings, past surveys, restraining order papers, and the new addition, a printed email from Karen Delaney, time-stamped 3 days after the police visit. The subject line read, "Urgent signage and encroachment threat." She'd written to the county assessor directly, claiming she had reason to believe Mr. Griffin was attempting to encroach beyond the previously disputed tree line, and attached the fraudulent assessment as supporting expert evidence. She also made a point of saying the area should remain open to HOA ecological use, whatever the hell that meant. I asked the clerk who had approved the hold order on my property. She pointed to a name I recognized from a different context, Deputy Eric Mallory, the same man who had taken photographs during the police visit. The same man who stood unusually close to Karen's SUV that day. The same man who, according to a quick public records search, was married to Karen Delaney's sister. There it was. Neat little bow. I left the office with a copy of the complaint, the fraudulent survey, and the printed email. Claire filed a formal objection with the county within 24 hours and attached a notarized declaration from a certified surveyor I had worked with in the past, affirming the accuracy of my existing boundary. But she warned me the process could drag. "Karen's not trying to win," Claire said during our call. "She's trying to exhaust you. This isn't legal strategy. It's siege warfare. But if Karen wanted a siege, she'd pick the wrong castle. I wasn't just going to defend my land. I was going to document every step she took on it. And the moment she, or any of her stooges, set one foot past my line again, I'd make sure the county prosecutor had a front row seat. They thought they could choke me with paper, but I'd already started building my case with data. It was the third night after the county's moratorium went into effect when the first camera alert hit my phone. A dull vibration on the nightstand, a soft chime that barely cut through the quiet of my bedroom. At first, half asleep, I figured it was a raccoon or a stray deer wandering too close to the perimeter again. But when I rolled over and glanced at the preview image on my lock screen, the sleep evaporated instantly. Two human silhouettes, not fauna. One crouched low near the cedar thicket, the other holding what looked unmistakably like a measuring tape. Both dressed in dark clothing, both moving with the kind of nervous purpose that only comes from doing something you know you shouldn't be doing. I sat up, heartbeat already picking up speed, and tapped the live feed. The night vision frame crackled for a moment before sharpening into a clear, monochrome shot of the southern boundary. There they were, two men on my land, 30-plus feet past the marker and far beyond the buffer zone Karen's complaint had referenced. One was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a ball cap. The other was smaller, hunched slightly, holding a tablet that kept flickering blue-white as he swiped back and forth. They had no flashlights, relying solely on the faint glow of the tablet screen and whatever night vision tech they must have had on their own devices. I didn't call out, didn't make a sound. Instead, I quietly slipped out of bed, grabbed my boots, and pulled on a jacket. The last thing I needed was them spotting me and bolting before the cameras captured what I needed. My adrenaline wasn't the jittery kind. It was cold, focused, the kind I'd felt last year when the HOA tried driving a gravel path straight into my pines. This wasn't panic. This was calculation. I grabbed my drone controller, stepped onto the back porch, and sent the drone straight into the air with a quiet whir. Its night vision mode clicked in as it rose, and within seconds, I had a second angle showing the same two intruders from above. The tall one took out a small LED marker, pressed a button, and dropped it on the ground. The other held up the tablet and said, in a voice just loud enough to carry through the mic, "Mark it here, 7 feet from the last marker. Hurry up, before he wakes up." 7 feet. That number wasn't random. It was the exact measurement Karen had thrown around in her earlier emails, the same false claim she had been peddling in her complaint. These guys weren't hunters, hikers, or bored teenagers. They were here to fabricate evidence, to create a false trail that, if discovered by a county inspector the next day, would miraculously support the HOA's claims. I zoomed the drone in closer. The tablet screen reflected their positions, showing a crude map, one I recognized immediately, the outdated, ancient, laughably useless 1983 survey. They were overlaying that fossil onto modern land coordinates, like they were performing some sort of archaeological ritual. Then the camera mic caught the smaller man whisper, "This doesn't match up. The line's off. We're nearly 40 feet in." "Doesn't matter," the tall one snapped. "She just needs enough footage to look like a violation. Mark it and move." She. Not Karen, just she. Like they were talking about some crime boss or cult matriarch orchestrating things from a throne made of HOA newsletters. They continued fumbling with their instruments, placing a second LED marker and pulling a measuring tape taut in the wrong direction entirely. One of them kicked a mound of pine needles, maybe trying to uncover a stake, maybe trying to bury one. Either way, it was an amateur hour performance, but a dangerous one. Stupidity combined with intent is still a threat. Satisfied with the footage I'd gathered, I stayed silent in the shadows until they finally slinked back toward the HOA side, climbing over a sagging section of the wire fence that had been there since before either development existed. The moment they were gone, I saved all the recordings to 3 separate cloud drives and exported the audio clip where they mentioned "while he's asleep." That line alone was better than any smoking gun. By the time I called Claire, the drone was already on its charging dock. She answered on the second ring, voice groggy. "Zach, it's after midnight. This better be—" "It's them," I cut in. 2 men, measuring, recording, fabricating the 7-foot encroachment. I have the whole thing. Her tone sharpened instantly. "Send me everything, all raw footage. Don't edit a second of it. I'll notify the county prosecutor tonight." This qualifies as criminal trespass and evidence tampering. I could hear her typing furiously through the phone. "Zach, listen carefully," she said. "Do not confront them. Do not post the footage yet. The prosecutor needs to obtain warrants before this becomes public." I promised her I'd keep quiet, for now. The next morning, before I'd even finished my oatmeal, a notification popped up on my phone. New post in Valley Pines Neighborhood Forum. I didn't have to guess who the author was. The preview text was enough. "Victory HOA has confirmed Mr. Griffin's 7-foot encroachment. Legal action pending. Community integrity preserved. Karen triumphant, posting fantasies as if they were fact. She didn't know I had last night's footage. She didn't know I'd already handed it to the prosecution. And she definitely didn't know that while she was celebrating a lie, I was preparing to gut her entire scheme from the inside out. Let her celebrate. It would make her downfall that much sweeter." By the following afternoon, Claire had already scheduled an emergency deposition with the Box Elder County prosecutor. I drove to her office just before lunch, armed with every piece of data we had. The drone's GPS logs, raw video footage, audio clips, time-stamped cloud syncs, even weather metadata for the night of the incursion. Claire's office looked less like a law firm and more like a command bunker. Papers tacked to corkboards, maps strewn across the conference table, 3 laptops running side by side like we were launching satellites, not prepping for court. "They made one mistake," she said, sipping her 4th cup of black coffee. "Well, several, but this one's golden. They used a revoked license as the basis for a county freeze. That's civil fraud and administrative misconduct. But the moment they stepped onto your land, especially after a restraining order, that's a felony." She'd already drafted the formal complaint, a multi-pronged legal offensive that included a cease and desist for Karen personally, a motion to immediately lift the work moratorium, and a counterclaim for malicious interference with registered land rights. But it didn't stop there. "They're counting on ambiguity," she said. "That's the HOA's entire weapon. Muddy the lines, overwhelm the county office with conflicting claims, and hope you'll back down. But ambiguity dies in the face of facts." And facts we had. Claire filed a motion to subpoena Karen's digital communications, specifically anything sent from or to HOA board members involving my property coordinates, survey plans, or law enforcement contacts. That same day, we filed for injunctive relief to unfreeze the buffer zone and prohibit any further HOA-driven actions until the case was resolved. Claire also included a detailed complaint against Deputy Eric Mallory, Karen's brother-in-law, for what she diplomatically labeled procedural bias and potential conflict of interest. It cited his participation in the initial police visit, his endorsement of the now discredited survey, and his presence at multiple HOA functions documented in public posts. We weren't accusing him outright, not yet, but we'd made it clear the scent of impropriety was strong enough to draw flies. Then came the knockout punch. Claire had tracked down the so-called surveyor, the man who signed the false document used in Karen's original complaint. His name was listed as Don Haskins, a name that showed up in a disciplinary registry for fraudulent land assessments in Nevada and Utah. A year prior, he had been fined and permanently stripped of his license. Claire's private investigator found him living in a converted RV outside Ogden, offering property consultations on Craigslist under a different name. When confronted, he folded faster than a bad poker hand. signed a sworn statement admitting he'd been paid under the table to produce a legacy-style boundary assessment for community clarification purposes. He named Karen directly, said she provided him with the 1983 map, and urged him to leave the date and license number as they were for credibility. He kept the payment receipt, cash, $3,000 in a manila envelope. Claire sent the affidavit straight to the DA. By the end of the week, the dominoes had started to fall. The prosecutor's office opened a formal inquiry into criminal trespass, conspiracy to commit document fraud, and violation of a standing court order. Karen was notified of the investigation, as was the HOA board, who quickly began to distance themselves like rats off a smoke-choked ship. But we weren't done. Claire scheduled a press interview with a local legal affairs podcast. Nothing flashy, just a clear and calm explanation of what had happened, how a private landowner was being harassed by a suburban HOA trying to expand its power past its charter. The episode aired 3 days later, and the impact was immediate. My inbox filled with sympathetic messages from neighbors, nearby landowners, even HOA members I'd never met. One man wrote, "Karen's been a tyrant for years. I didn't think anyone could beat her at her own game." The court date was set for 2 weeks out. Meanwhile, Claire filed an emergency motion for a full digital audit of the HOA's property records, hoping to uncover if this scheme with the surveyor was isolated or if similar tactics had been used on other residents. Given the way the board had gone silent, we both suspected the rabbit hole went deeper than just my forest trail. Karen, for her part, had gone unusually quiet. No posts, no HOA newsletters, no urgent community safety notices left on mailboxes. Just radio silence. That, more than anything, told me she knew the storm was coming. The morning of the hearing arrived gray and still, like the air had decided to hold its breath. Claire and I pulled into the courthouse lot just before 8. Both of us dressed like we were heading to a funeral. Hers a strategic choice in pinstriped charcoal, mine a basic black suit I'd worn exactly twice before. The courtroom was already buzzing when we stepped in. A couple of HOA board members lingered near the back, pretending they weren't watching me. Karen wasn't there yet. The judge presiding was Honorable Meredith Kane, an old-school Utah legalist with a reputation for loathing neighborhood theater. She'd once thrown out an HOA complaint over someone's fence color, calling it a mockery of judicial time. Claire said she was the best possible draw we could have gotten. I didn't dare hope. Karen arrived 5 minutes late, flanked by a different attorney than before, a younger guy in an ill-fitted navy suit who looked like he'd lost a bet. She didn't even look at me, just adjusted her blouse and tried to look unfazed as she settled into the plaintiff's table. The judge started with a dry request. "I've reviewed the summary documents. Let's not waste the court's time. Defense, proceed." Claire was flawless. She began with the court order from last year, firm, precise, stamped, and signed. She reminded the judge that HOA members, including its president, were legally barred from coming within 50 feet of my property. Then came the map, our current one registered with the county in 2022, complete with GPS coordinates and matching field data. Then she moved in for the kill. The false expert report, signed by Don Haskins. She read aloud his sworn affidavit and showed the court the revoked license record. Then, the footage from the security cameras. The 2 men climbing over my fence, walking deep into my land, tape measuring and whispering about moving quickly. Claire paused and let the audio play again. "Faster, before he wakes up," one of them muttered. It echoed through the courtroom. Claire finished with the payment envelope. We had subpoenaed the bank deposit records. The serial number on one of the 20s matched a photograph Don had taken of the cash before depositing it. Karen's handwriting was visible on the inside flap, her own KD initials beside the words Community Realignment Survey. When it was the plaintiff's turn, her new lawyer stumbled through a sad attempt at deflection. The HOA believed the boundary to be unclear, he said. The intention wasn't to harass, but to protect communal integrity. Judge Kane tilted her head. "You're citing a 1983 zoning map to override a federally registered survey from 2022, correct?" "Yes, Your Honor, but..." "And that map was used to justify police intervention, a property freeze, and an attempted boundary correction by a man no longer legally licensed to perform surveys." "Well, that was not known to my client at the time." Claire stood. "We have correspondence between Karen Delaney and Don Haskins. She knew." She solicited his services deliberately to avoid regulatory scrutiny. The judge held up a finger. "I don't need more," she said. The court finds this not only a violation of an existing restraining order, but a coordinated effort to manipulate land records using fraudulent documentation. That is a very serious offense. Karen finally broke. She turned to her attorney, whispering furiously, her face red and blotchy. Her voice raised just enough for the bailiff to step closer. The judge ordered an immediate lifting of the property freeze. She issued a directive for the sheriff's department to launch a formal internal review into Deputy Mallory's role in the matter. The court also ordered the HOA to pay for my legal expenses, temporary damages, and civil penalties totaling $62,000. But the part that made Karen finally sink into her chair like a deflated balloon. Judge Kane referred the matter for criminal prosecution. 2 charges: intentional violation of a protective order and knowingly submitting fraudulent evidence in a civil claim. Both felonies. And as a cherry on top, she approved Claire's motion to unseal the HOA's digital communications for a broader investigation into property manipulation practices. Outside the courtroom, the press was already gathering. Someone shoved a mic toward me and asked what it felt like to beat an HOA in court. "I don't know if I beat them," I said. "But they definitely lost." Claire just smiled. For a couple days after the verdict, the neighborhood was eerily quiet. You could hear wind chimes half a mile away. No HOA flyers showed up in my mailbox. No notes on the fence. No contractors wandering too close to my land pretending to be lost. Claire said we should brace for one of 2 outcomes. Either everything would cool off, or we'd see Karen spiral. Guess which one we got. It started with the Facebook post. Karen, now facing felony charges and stripped of her official role pending investigation, posted a wild, rambling status update in the Valley Pines Reserve Community Group. Something about hostile actors and deep mapping fraud, and how I was using rogue satellite interference to shift the boundaries of my property. She blamed judicial corruption, libel from deep state contractors, and even accused Claire by name of infiltrating local governance. The post was down within the hour, but screenshots were everywhere. The court had imposed a gag order on her regarding the case. That status update alone could have triggered contempt. But what came next was worse. Around midnight, 3 nights later, my motion sensor lights flickered on near the western edge of the property. I was awake, half working, half still rattled from everything, so I pulled up the perimeter feed. There, clear as a mugshot, was Karen Delaney standing in the woods. She wasn't trespassing, not quite. She was just on the HOA side of the boundary, staring at one of the concrete posts with my laminated court order bolted to it. Dressed in sweats, barefoot, holding a flashlight in one hand and what looked like a crowbar in the other. I didn't move, just watched. She paced for about 10 minutes, whispering to herself. Then she raised the crowbar and tried to pry the metal plate from the concrete. After 2 failed tugs, she gave up and stood there crying, like full-on sobbing into her fists. Then she dropped the tool and walked off into the trees. I downloaded the footage, time-stamped and geotagged, and forwarded it to Claire, along with a single message. She's losing it. By morning, I had a response from Claire and a county prosecutor. They were ready to formally add a motion for electronic monitoring. Given the existing restraining order and her proximity to the property boundary, the new footage would be used to justify a court-issued ankle monitor. Within 48 hours, Karen was in front of Judge Kane again. This time, she wasn't smug. She was pale, jumpy, and clearly not sleeping. Her lawyer tried to argue emotional duress and a momentary lapse in judgment, but the judge was having none of it. She granted the motion. Karen was placed under restricted movement, her GPS-tracked ankle bracelet programmed to trigger an alert if she came within 100 feet of my property. Now, here's the kicker. Most of the HOA board didn't support her. Turns out, she'd been running half of her so-called authority based on misinterpreted bylaws and fear tactics. People started to whisper. One of the board members even emailed Claire confidentially with screenshots from their internal group chat. Karen had referred to me as the forest squatter and joked about relocating my fence line if they ever got the chance. The HOA wasn't just losing a president, it was unraveling. A week later, I got an anonymous tip. Karen had tried to delete HOA records from her private email account. The tip came with proof, a forwarded email chain showing Karen requesting the deletion of all documents involving Boundary Revision 4B. The sender, a new HOA treasurer who wanted nothing to do with the mess. That was the final straw. The county DA added a new charge, obstruction of evidence in an ongoing investigation. This time, no court appearance needed. They showed up at her house with a warrant and confiscated her devices. And just like that, the HOA's queen fell off her crooked throne. Her house, once the HOA model home, now stood withering behind a collapsing picket fence, while her own badge was stripped from every HOA document, every meeting, every mailbox memo. I wish I could say I felt relief, but it felt more like watching a sinkhole slowly consume a neighbor's porch while you sip coffee and wonder if it might reach your property line too. You'd think, after an ankle monitor, a court loss, and a federal violation of a restraining order, someone like Karen would quietly back down. But Karen Delaney wasn't wired for defeat. She was wired like a garage outlet spliced into a dishwasher line, always one spark from blowing the entire system. 2 days after her devices were seized, I got a call from a state investigator named Felton Parks. He sounded calm, but he asked very specific questions. Mr. Griffin, can you confirm you received a letter from the sheriff's office dated April 3rd, instructing you to cease all border-related development? Yes, I said, already feeling my pulse rise. It was based on a survey discrepancy filed by the HOA. Why? Because the surveyor who signed that affidavit, Russell McDermott, is currently in custody. He's been charged with submitting forged reports in 3 separate property disputes across the state. Yours is number 4. That was it. The matchstick hit the powder keg. According to Felton, McDermott hadn't held a valid surveying license since 2018. He'd had it revoked after getting caught using doctored topographic overlays for a mining access case in Nevada. And yet here he was, popping up in Utah, signing expert statements on HOA letterhead. Felton told me that in my case, the Boundary Revision 4B packet had been submitted not through the county clerk, but directly to a sheriff's liaison, none other than Officer Blake Henry, Karen's brother-in-law. The dots were connecting fast, and the image wasn't flattering. Claire filed a motion the next day to unseal all communication logs between the HOA and the sheriff's office. That's when things got even uglier. Blake had used his badge to bypass official review and marked the GPS complaint as urgent, triggering the temporary work freeze on my land. Internal emails showed Karen and Blake exchanging drafts of the complaint before it was even filed, down to the wording on the surveyor's findings. It was a forged hit job. The county DA wasted no time. Within 72 hours, Blake was suspended and under investigation for official misconduct and conspiracy to falsify zoning enforcement. The story started to spread. Local news picked it up. A quiet civil engineer defending his property against a fraudulent HOA president and her rogue allies. It made for a damn good headline. Reporters called. Trucks with logos started parking near Valley Pines Gate. I kept my head down, but the neighborhood was buzzing like a kicked hornet's nest. HOA members began resigning one by one, first the secretary, then 2 committee heads. I overheard a conversation in the general store, someone saying their dues had doubled in the past year and that Karen had pushed through emergency landscaping assessments without any proper vote. Turns out she'd been using HOA funds to hire legal consultants and surveyors, none of whom were properly vetted or licensed. Claire forwarded me a full audit request form. We filed it immediately. The county opened a financial probe into HOA expenditures. That was the death knell. In less than a week, Valley Pines Reserve wasn't a polished community with organized bylaws. It was a rogue operation hemorrhaging authority, losing members, and now under state and county review. My mailbox, once flooded with warnings and passive-aggressive HOA newsletters, now held only silence. But I wasn't done. I wanted every inch of this land secured, every inch backed by law, GPS, and cement. Because if you leave even a crack in your perimeter, people like Karen will crawl through it with forged maps and Facebook manifestos. So I ordered something special, a new sign, cast aluminum, bolted to a post sunk 3 feet deep in concrete. The top read, United States GEO Protected Landmark, per federal court order. Below it, laminated copies of the ruling, the restraining order, and GPS coordinates engraved in steel. And for good measure, I added a weatherproof QR code that linked to the court case record. It wasn't just a warning, it was a wall made of truth. I stood at the edge of my land as dawn broke, watching the light crawl across the mossy undergrowth, the steel post gleaming in the early sun. The new sign looked like it belonged to a military installation, formal, immovable, and completely unmissable. It wasn't just a warning anymore, it was a statement. 3 weeks had passed since the fallout, and the aftershocks were still shaking the HOA like a cracked foundation. Karen Delaney was sentenced to 12 months probation and slapped with a $25,000 fine for filing a false police report, violating a restraining order, and orchestrating fraudulent property claims. She was also court-ordered to deliver a formal apology to me, on paper and in front of the community. She showed up to the emergency HOA meeting in a beige pantsuit, eyes hollow, face pale. When her turn came, she read a statement through clenched teeth, her voice trembling with rage or shame. I couldn't tell which. I apologized to Mr. Zachary Griffin for my actions, which led to unfounded accusations, false boundary claims, and unwarranted legal disruption. Someone in the back muttered, "Took her long enough." I didn't clap. I didn't smile. I just stood there and watched the last ember of her authority flicker out. Then came the civil judgment. The court ordered Valley Pines Reserve HOA to pay me $62,000 to cover legal fees, court costs, and compensatory damages. Their community fund was already bleeding from bad contracts and rushed legal hires. This was the final cut. Blake Henry, Karen's brother-in-law, was dismissed from the sheriff's department after the internal affairs report confirmed he had abused his position and colluded in a private zoning complaint without proper protocol. No criminal charges yet, but he won't be wearing a badge again anytime soon. The so-called surveyor, McDermott, wasn't so lucky. He pled out after evidence surfaced of multiple forged expert statements filed across county lines. He was sentenced to 2.5 years for falsifying official records and impersonating a licensed professional. That's time in an actual cell, not a gated community. The HOA board tried to hold a vote to replace Karen, but most members had already fled the sinking ship. Several residents petitioned the county to dissolve the HOA entirely. Last I heard, the proposal was under review, and 3 separate homeowners filed suits of their own, citing misused funds and coerced compliance. Valley Pines went quiet. No more newsletter threats. No more Facebook grandstanding. The HOA's once proud entrance sign, freshly painted each month, now hung crooked, the gold leaf peeling from its surface like a dying lie. As for me, I finished the fencing project. But this time, I did it in full view of the cameras, in full view of the law. My new cameras, by the way, have a wireless uplink and an auto backup system to a secured cloud. They also send me alerts if anyone crosses the perimeter line within 50 feet. Karen taught me that lesson well. A few neighbors came by. Some brought apologies. One older couple said, "We always thought it was strange the HOA was so obsessed with your trail." I nodded. I didn't need their loyalty. I just needed my peace. Now, when I walk through my forest, I don't just see trees and brush. I see a line drawn in GPS, backed by the courts, defended in blood pressure and attorney fees. I see the cost of ownership, not just financial, but emotional, strategic, legal. And at the edge of it all, bolted into concrete, stands that steel post with the laminated verdict, a quiet sentinel to the war we just finished. Funny thing is, I never wanted to fight. I just wanted to be left alone in my woods, on my land, with my peace. But if you corner a man on his own ground, he'll do whatever it takes to keep it, because some boundaries aren't just physical. Some boundaries are sacred.